Hello, guys. Thank you for tuning in. So, is everything predetermined? Is everything predestined? Does an individual have free will? Or in Hindu culture, is everything written on the forehead already? Now, that does not literally mean that everything is scripted on the forehead. It just means that whatever an individual goes through in his entire life, it is beyond the control of that individual. Now, first of all, it is important to look at why do we think that we have a free will? Why do we think that everything is not predestined, predetermined, right? Now, the only reason that we think that everything is not predetermined is because we are having to take decisions after decisions. We're having to choose between several things several times in a day in our daily life, right? In our experience, there is this entity you or quote unquote I that decides to do something or not do something, right? Now, on the surface, it may look like there is an entity, quote unquote I or quote unquote you, that decides to do something or not do something. It seems like there is a choice. But what I am saying here is that the very entity that is taking credit for all the decision, that very entity is an illusion, and there is nothing inside of us that is responsible for taking the decision. But what actually happens in the moment of taking the decision is that all of our decision is influenced by two things. First, the programming that body has. Now, programming meaning the concepts of good and concepts of bad that body has up until that moment of time, and the genes that were passed on to this body mind organism by other two body mind organisms, which we call parents. Now, genes and the programming, these two are responsible for any decision to happen in a body mind organism. Now, for example, on the surface, it may look like you are having to choose between going to the US or going to Australia. And for various reasons, you chose to go to the US, right? So it may seem like you are responsible for taking that decision. You took the decision of going to the US, right? But what actually happened in that moment is that your programming was such, probably you had some friends in the US, or you like the food out there, you like the weather out there, whatever it is, there is no one that can take credit for the decision you took to go to the US. But what I'm trying to say is that the decision of going to the US happened because the programming that body mind organism had up until that moment of time was more in favor of that decision. Now, okay, I see what you're saying. I can understand it intellectually, but still, moment to moment in my life, while I'm functioning, I have to take the decision, right? Now, for those people, what I say is that just try this simple experiment. Now, the experiment is this: in a day, just take one moment or one action that you think is your decision, that you think is your choice, right? And carefully analyze that moment as to whether it was completely your decision, quote unquote, you chose to do that, or it happened. For example, this morning I was walking past a Nepali restaurant and I decided to go inside and eat momo, or what you might call dumplings, right? Now, on the surface, I might say, okay, I was walking past that restaurant and I, quote unquote, I decided to go inside, order a plate of momo and eat it, right? But if I look closely, if I dissect it step by step, what happened in that moment? So, what happened is that as I was walking past that restaurant, a thought came to me, a thought happened in this brain which said, let's go inside the restaurant and eat a plate of momo. Now, as I've repeated this so many times, a thought happens in a brain. No one chooses to get what kind of thought next. A thought happens in a brain, right? I did not have any control over what kind of thought I was going to get next, and the thought that I got was, let's go inside the restaurant and eat a plate of momo. Now, to that thought, this body could have reacted in two different ways. One, I don't want to go inside. I have other things to do. I don't want to eat momo, blah blah blah. And I could have chosen not to eat momo, or the decision could have happened of not going inside, but another decision happened, which was, let's go inside and let's eat momo. So what I'm trying to say is that the programming that this body had up until that moment while I was walking past that restaurant, the programming was such that the decision happened of going inside that restaurant and eating a plate of momo. Quote unquote, I did not choose to go inside, or there is no one that can take credit for going inside, but the programming was such that the decision of going inside happened. Now, again, I want to emphasize more on the point that a thought happens in a brain, a thought happens in a body, and we do not have any control over what kind of thought that we get next. Now, there's this beautiful experiment that was done by this scientist called Benjamin Libet. I'll put the link to that article in the description below. But basically, what he found out is that the moment that you decide to do something, that decision has already happened in the brain half a second before the entity you, the entity I, claims that it is its decision. So basically, what it's saying is that we might think that we are taking the decision, or at the moment of taking the decision, we might think that we're taking the decision, but the decision has already happened half a second before, even before the claiming has happened that it is our decision, right? I think it is more than enough to prove that we do not choose to get what kind of thought next, because the thought has already happened in the brain half a second before we know what kind of thought it is, right? So similarly, at every single moment of our life, our brain reacts to something from outside, whether it may be someone said something, or our senses perceived something, or whatever it is. Our brain reacts to it, produces that kind of thought, and our body creates action according to its programming it has up until that moment of time to that thought. So the conclusion is that everything is predetermined, everything is predestined. Now when I say predetermined, predestined, it does not mean that the script is already written somewhere, right? It does not mean that. It absolutely does not mean that. Most people mistake it for that. No, it is not written, or the script is not ready somewhere. It just means that there is no one that can take credit for any kind of decision that happened from any individual. The decision happens according to the programming it has, and according to the genes it received from two body mind organisms that we call parents, and those two play roles in decisions that happen from an individual. But there is no one to take credit for any kind of decision, and everything in this world, including the decision we take, including the actions that come out of us, everything is just a happening in the nature. But there is no one making it happen. There is no one that can take credit for it happening, but everything is just a happening. So the conclusion is, yes, everything is predetermined. Now, having said that, thank you for tuning in, and thank you for your love and support. If you want me to talk about anything else, just comment on the section below and I'll talk about it in my other videos. If you want to buy helpful books, just go to www.hellomadman.com. And also, if you haven't checked out the sorts that we've uploaded from MadMan, please go and do so. Thank you, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.